Well, it looks like a recession is coming. Or maybe it's not. Or maybe it is. It seems like it's been a long wait for the other economic shoe to drop, and in the meantime, many questions continue to arise around managing costs in organizations. This is Kevin Donahue, Senior Director with Protiviti, welcoming you to a new edition of Powerful Insights. CFOs and finance leaders continue to have a lot of questions and get even more from their internal stakeholders and customers about projections, cost management, supply chains, and more. This is especially true for organizations in the manufacturing and distribution industry. They operate in multiple locations. They often are operating on different systems. They can be more susceptible to supply chains and any interruptions that might take place around the world. And they have unique talent management challenges. Strategic cost optimization and management. That is something beneficial to commit to during any economic cycle, especially for organizations in this industry. I had the opportunity to speak with two experts on this topic, Protiviti Managing Directors Shawn Seasongood and Andrea Vardaro Thomas. Both are leaders in Protiviti's Business Performance Improvement Group. Shawn, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here, Kevin.
Andrea, it is great to speak with you as well.
Great to be here as well.
Andrea, let me ask you our first question. Can you talk about what strategic cost optimization is and how it's different from cost-cutting activities that companies may currently be considering?
Sure. As we think about the current economic landscape, all of the uncertainties today, many companies are immediately looking to reduce costs, really to achieve the bottom line results that they plan for. And a lot of times these decisions are generally a reaction, right? They focus on the short-term benefits as opposed to considering longer-term impacts to the business, or if the costs that are being cut or being considered will actually limit the company's ability to achieve their strategic goals. Now, in comparison, strategic cost optimization is more of an ongoing business-focused discipline to help manage spending and reduce costs in a more meaningful way while maximizing value for the business. So the challenge for many companies here is really how to define a sustainable operating model that balances both the cost effectiveness and efficiencies while ensuring that the customer experience isn't negatively impacted, and also ensuring that the company's strategic goals aren't compromised in the process as well.
And Andrea, just to be clear, this is the type of conversation that more companies are having and that we're speaking to companies about away from the economic uncertainty cycle we're in, right? These are conversations that have been happening more and more over the past few years, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of this starting with the pandemic, right? It's a reaction to what's happening. It's a reaction to the unknown. So when your strategic plan is built and things are operating as you would expect, you follow that plan. But when you start to think about all these unforeseen factors, if the company hasn't done appropriate planning, maybe some strategic scenario analysis, thinking through all these different possibilities, they may just have a reaction to make sure that they can achieve their bottom line. And cost cutting is usually a tactic that's taken. Again, it's a short-term focus and less focused on that longer term. So the strategic cost optimization is a way to really think about it in a more meaningful way and a long-term way that's going to be in alignment with the company's overall strategic goals.
Excellent. Thank you. And Shawn, to you now, we're talking here about organizations specifically in the manufacturing and distribution industry. Why is cost optimization so important in this industry group in particular in our current environment?
Good question, Kevin. I think, across the board, all industries are focusing on cost optimization. But when you think about manufacturing specifically, I think, companies are looking at ways to improve their profit margins, particularly with the raw material prices, labor costs, and operational expenses. Over the last, I would say, 3 years, a lot of them have been constantly fluctuating. So I think profitability with those labor costs and raw material prices are specific focused to manufacturing. I think also, too, if you think of the manufacturing industry broadly, there's sort of a globalization across that industry. It's a very interconnected world within manufacturing companies. They, a lot of times operate in a global scale. And they might, a lot of times outsource certain components of their processes or outsource things to different regions or countries to take advantage of labor arbitrage. So cost-effective outsource options around choosing the right suppliers, negotiating the right favorable terms is very, very important to the specific industry. I also think that the supply chain complexity is very, very important around, multiple suppliers, distributors, logistics, networks involved. That's very, very impactful to specifically the manufacturing industry. So each component of that supply chain adds cost to the overall bottom line. So I think there's a lot of focus on that. And then the other thing around that is, they're so dependent on some of these supply chains that can be a big driver when it comes to customer satisfaction. So I think there's an increased focus on that. So making sure you have the right raw goods, you have the right supply chain operations in place to make sure that the end game, you're driving the right result for your customers is very, very important to them. And I think that's why it might be, an increased focus within this particular industry.
So, Shawn, you may have just covered this, but I want to ask, how have you seen executives approaching strategic cost optimization within organizations in this industry? I know you outlined some of the challenges, supply chain and talent and raw materials. Are there strategic steps some executives are employing that would be considered maybe, best practice?
Yeah, I think one thing that, if you're really looking to, grow margins, I think one of the things that, even though I work for a global consulting firm, one things I would really lean into first and foremost is really getting your management team's perspective. A lot of time you'll see that the people that are within the organization actually know where there's waste or they know where there's redundancies. They know where there potentially could save money. So I think the first thing that leaders should do is work with their management team to identify them and really learn, lean into the institutional knowledge of your employees, because I think a lot of times, they have experience working through certain transactions or reviewing certain departments that they actually know a lot as far as like if they needed to reduce or cut costs, they are probably one of the best assets you have as far as generating those ideas or really formulating those strategies. So I would definitely think that making sure that the questions asked, and you don't necessarily have to lean into a third party right away, but make sure you're exploring all those internal ideas first and foremost, and making sure that they are, looked at and identified. But I do think that, one of the areas that seems to be really ripe for a lot of, savings is usually looking at technology. There's several reasons why that we think technology does a lot, but, usually technology expenses, represent a substantial portion of a company's budget. Everything from hardware to software purchases to maintenance, to support contracts, all that stuff costs a lot of money. So I think by scrutinizing technology spend, you can identify areas where costs can be more optimized or reduced. A lot of companies are using or have a lot of outdated systems or redundant tools. So looking at the ways to streamline those technology solutions going forward do seem to be very, very good as far as being able to achieve cost synergies. And then also looking at the different ways that you use third-party support for technology. I mean, a lot of stuff around vendor contract, consolidated software licensing, exploring alternative solutions for that offer comparable functionality at a lower cost. All things that, again, looking at technology spend is sometimes you can really achieve a lot of those cost optimization opportunities. And the other thing is everybody's seeing the rise of, cloud computing, and, that in itself provides more scalability, more flexibility, and usually has some cost advantages. But looking at that, because if you don't have a lot of diligence around that, those management costs around cloud can start to escalate rapidly. And so you want to make sure that even though you've gone to cloud-based solutions, that you're also looking at the way that those costs are being managed. And I think everybody has been challenged over the last couple of years around security, around technology, and those costs sometimes, haven't been looked in depth as far as rationalization around the security cost. I mean, everybody knows the reputational risk you have around a data breach, but sometimes people have spent just to spend in those areas, and they haven't done a lot of rationalization when it comes to data privacy and security. And those are one another couple areas that if you look at and do some strategies around rationalization, you can achieve some of the benefits around, reducing that overall technology spend.
And Shawn, just to add to that point, I do think that as companies are looking at building out their ESG strategies, they may even want to consider, how they can reduce cost over time by implementing some of those new technologies that might be more energy efficient, environmentally friendly, more sustainable over time. And that really is important in a manufacturing organization. So, as they look to build their ESG strategy, cost reductions over time could factor into those decisions as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with my partner Andrea on that. I think looking at those, looking at costs and ESG at the same time can definitely, have some direct benefits, both from a company standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, but also from a cost synergy standpoint.
I love that idea of going out and talking and listening to your people and getting that intelligence that way. That would seem so valuable, kind of the people on the front lines.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when we go into an organization, and looking at them, how they want, trying to drive cost optimization, a lot of the discovery is through just conversations with, management. And management, they absolutely know the business really well. And I do think sometimes people are a little short-sighted as far as not asking their own leaders to try to drive some of this, cost optimization themselves. Because again, there's a lot of awareness within an organization as well where the savings could be driven from.
I want to talk about IT spend more in a minute, but Andrea, first let me ask you, I would imagine procurement is a big target area for organizations to go to look for optimizing costs, saving costs, however we want to term it. Can you talk a little bit more about that and some of the common themes you're seeing when it comes to the procurement function?
Yeah, I mean, vendor management is and should be a key area of focus. So, that includes managing your vendor relationships, negotiating better terms, better prices, even consolidating or rationalizing vendors to help reduce costs, but do it in a meaningful way. And really a critical component here is actual visibility into the spend and into the suppliers across your organization. So to this end, sourcing and procurement teams, they should be partnering with their finance partners to help identify opportunities that are based on not only market dynamics, but data analytics that finance teams can do to provide some meaningful insights that can help shape and really support actions to optimize the spend. We saw a lot of this as the pandemic hit, with even, based in New York, a lot of rent reductions. And finance organizations were working very closely with their teams to identify where are those opportunities, where can they renegotiate some of those contracts, and what does that mean from an overall perspective to their company's P&L. So we saw a lot of teams working very closely with finance in that respect. But the common challenge that we see related to this is that companies sometimes lack the available data or relevant data, in addition to tools and resources to help them be able to develop those analytics that are necessary to identify where opportunities may exist. So, it's important to think about the upfront investments that you'll need to have to be able to support this type of analysis. It's also important to make sure that there's some form of strategic alignment across the organization on supply partners, spend categories across the organization, and really defining that program or a strategy and roadmap that can help drive this alignment. Shawn talked about including management in these conversations and these discussions. They should be involved and they can help drive the necessary focus. And then engaging that finance organization is so critical, right? Finance can not only provide the transparency and visibility to spend, both current spend and projected spend, but they can do the ROI analysis to support the types of programs and support the alignment across the organization to ensure that the goals that might be set for annualized target cost savings are achieved and how the organization will achieve those on a consolidated basis.
Yeah, just to add to some of the excellent points that Andrea made, I mean, one of the things I see, Kevin, is just Andrea mentioned the data analytics. I mean, just having awareness as far as where the dollars are being spent and having that transparency. I mean, it seems like a simple exercise, but we see a lot of organizations that don't really have a viewpoint on where they're spending dollars. And so once they get that viewpoint, there's some strategic decisions they can make, but a lot of companies don't really have the data analytics to really understand where their dollars are going and where there's awareness is around what they're spending money on. And I think one of the first steps, which I think Andrea talked about, is just having that overall transparency and awareness to really look at like a spend analysis. Where are we spending dollars and to what third parties, and where can we potentially drive some of the contract negotiations around that spend? And I think, again, tying this back to the industry, I think that's becoming more and more important when you think of, the supply chain challenges that have happened within manufacturing companies in the last 3 years.
I would make an educated guess that if we look at the kind of the analytics, advanced analytics capabilities of manufacturing organizations, they on average would probably be below that of, say, an organization in consumer products or retail or a technology organization. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think that depends on the maturity of the organization specifically, but I think that's a fair assessment. Finance should have a seat at the table. They should be a part of that decision making. And having a finance organization that actually has the business acumen to support the operators within the business is a critical component. And without that business acumen sitting across finance, regardless of which industry you're in, that can have a major impact on your ability to be able to find those opportunities and even identify where there might be risk as well.
Shawn, circling back to IT and IT spend containment specifically, what are some of the common themes you're seeing here?
Well, I think one common theme is, a lot of companies have spent a lot of money to upgrade their technology platforms, but what they do is they have a lot of redundancies where they'll have a new system, but they'll, continue to use the old system, and there's not as much sunsetting of some of those old technologies. So you almost have shadow systems where your original ROI was, we're going to actually bring down our technology costs with this new technology. And what you're actually seeing is, an increase in spend because they're maintaining 2 or 3 systems where they didn't, that was not something that they originally thought was part of the plan. The plan was to upgrade and to sunset. And that has not happened as strategically as a lot of organizations had hoped. I think also, cybersecurity investments such as firewalls, encryption tools, security audits, all are essential to protect data and prevent against breaches that can have a significant financial and reputational risk. But I think now is the time to do some rationalization of that. I mean, nobody wants to downgrade the spend they're making in cybersecurity, but there is ways to, look at some of that spend at this point. Some of it's driven by regulations, which we all understand you need to be compliant, but, maybe, with these new technologies, there is maybe some stuff that has become obsolete. You might be able to, not have to support them. So there might be an opportunity to renegotiate or consolidate software licenses, and also explore alternative solutions. Maybe some of the stuff can be offshored. Some of the stuff maybe could be done by a third party cheaper. So I think regularly reviewing your spend around technology is a very good practice. And I think it's something that a lot of companies have been in the mode of spending, but not a lot of companies have been in the mode of rationalization. I think that's the next phase as we take this sort of initiative future, is that rationalization of IT spend.
Andrea, I wanted to next ask you about cost cutting, if that becomes necessary. We've been talking a lot about cost optimization, but there is going to be a time when companies are considering cutting costs. And we often see this in the form of, say, reductions in force or restructurings. What should companies be considering as it relates to the organization and its people and in making these determinations?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that we hear more often than not as of late. And it's reflected in some of the data that we've seen too. Some of the top priorities from CFOs and finance leaders today is the rising cost of wages and the ability to not only retain talent, but recruit qualified candidates. But the complication here is that, there's a lot of uncertainty. So as I said earlier, there's a tendency to react and to implement some short-term changes, such as, hiring freezes or the RIFs, as you mentioned, or even compensation adjustments. So, what we would recommend typically when you think about this significant organizational related changes is that you have a clear understanding as to what your transformation roadmap may look like. So Shawn mentioned implementing new technologies. With technology changes and investment will come changes in your process. And you really need to identify where those changes in your process will reduce or change the workload that the teams currently have, to identify where those areas of opportunity are to either reduce the team, the reduction in force, or to reassign and shift the responsibilities. So, I think having a clear understanding of what your roadmap is, not only from a technology and process perspective, but align the organizational changes to that is important. But also considering that there are some long-term talent shortages, as we know. So anticipating what are the needs that you have today and what are the needs that you're going to have in the future organization through transformation, and making sure that you have those appropriate skill sets. So if you're moving more towards an analytical technology that's going to drive more informed decisions, do you have the right team in place to understand not only how to use that technology, but how to articulate requirements and understand the analysis to be able to feed that back into a clear decision, right? So making sure you have the right skill sets. Companies really should just take that step back and review those functional areas for cost savings. So, through that process engineering and automation, you may find that, there's a target operating model that will look different from today because you can migrate certain repeatable transactional activities to a shared service center or a center of excellence. So that may reduce the amount of individuals sprinkled throughout the organization doing the same types of functions where you can centralize that. Re-engineering those processes, incorporating the technology, you could help to identify other areas where there might be some leakage or transformational opportunities as well. And again, shift the focus so you're getting more productivity and value from your employees so that you can drive top line and support that growth. But, again, I think, one of the problems with transformational change is that you have to have a clearly defined strategy and prioritization, and that is people aligned with technology and process changes.
Yeah, I think Andrea covered some excellent points. I think a lot of this is around, maybe the work needs to be done, but it's, delivered through a different operating model. So, Andrea pointed to a shared service, but, before going to sort of a centralized, way of doing work, I think driving consistency, driving standard processes, looking at the way that if by centralization or a shared service, you can achieve a different operating model that can actually help to achieve some of these cost efficiencies is a great way of doing it. But so the work in itself still has to be delivered, but the way it's delivered might actually change when you look at things that become much more standard, much more automated and much more, maybe that can be done, an alternative location or could be done through a centralized location. So I think that theme that she's pointing to is a very relevant theme that everybody should keep top of mind.
And an observation specifically for this industry group, we've written before on the fact that in an environment where there continues to be a war for talent, it can be even a greater challenge for manufacturing organizations, say, to recruit talent because they may not be in the type of industry a lot of candidates are interested in going into. They're also based many times, outside of the more desirable urban centers that certainly certain generations want to be near. Is that something finance or the broader group is accounting for in their calculations here?
And they should be, right? If you're building your planning and your modeling appropriately, then you should be accounting for that. I mean, a lot of companies now, you mentioned just the locations of where the talent is, right? With the new hybrid world or remote world, organizations are able to source talent outside of their current markets. And we see that, in the finance organizations that, you're able to support the team across the, if you're a US-based organization nationally or even internationally. So, I think that there is certain creative solutions to source the right talent in different locations. But ultimately, maintaining some of the, the focus from a spend perspective really should sit with finance, partnering with their HR teams to identify what the costs look like in different scenarios.
Andrea, I think following up on some of your prior comments here, what role should the finance function in particular play in strategic cost optimization initiatives?
Yeah, so I talked earlier about the business partnership with sourcing and procurement, but more broadly speaking, finance should be partnering across the organization. And that partnership is critical for transparency and to spend. And when you couple that with the analytics, you can really drive more informed decisions. So one of the ways that finance organizations can provide that necessary level of transparency is through zero-based budgeting or zero-based forecasting. And to do this successfully, first, finance needs to really understand the business objective related to the spend or the allocation of capital, and quantifying the spend that's planned for that investment. And with this information, then finance can build up from the bottom, right, starting at zero, the spend model that can be leveraged to build a forecast. And it provides that basis for an evaluation of planned spend over time. So you can really determine, is it aligned with the business strategy? Can this spend be justified? Is it associated with an actual activity or project? And if it is, can it generate ROI? If not in the near term, then at some point in the future. So it's really the level of visibility that can provide a basis for areas where companies can identify where there might be opportunity to reduce spend, right? Maybe they're overspending or maybe they're underinvesting. So it'll help provide that information to, better align your resources with your goals as well. You can get a lot of information from zero-based budgeting, but it can also be leveraged to build a scenario-based planning model. So again, scenario planning is something that is a significant planning tool to help organizations make those informed decisions. And based on changing circumstances, and we've seen it over the course of the past couple of years, many companies are implementing this type of analyses. It's difficult to do when you don't have the level of detail, especially when it comes to spend, right? You want to understand what areas you may want to reduce cost or you may want to invest that will result in reduction of cost over the course of a couple of years, and be able to model that out and look at all those different scenarios. So the finance organizations that have done this well, we've seen them leverage the technology and tools that they have. They leverage data, right? Robust data that is available and clean. Really making sure that there's a governance strategy around that data too. That's so important. And then data is so critical, both internal data as well as external data. And the finance organization needs to be well-versed in analytics. They need to understand the business, right? How certain decisions may impact, certain business decisions may impact the financials. So that meaningful cross-functional collaboration throughout the process is really important. And then by maintaining the zero-based budget or a zero-based forecast, you can, over the course of time, incorporate that into the ongoing forecast to provide that ongoing visibility for risk and opportunities as you build each subsequent forecast. And it helps make those decisions more quickly as well.
This has been just a really interesting conversation today. Thank you both for your insights. I have one more question, Shawn. I'll toss this to you. Based on your experience, what do you think is something that is underestimated when you or when organizations are performing cost optimization?
I think Andrea will have a take on this as well, but top of mind first thing that comes to mind for me, Kevin, is tone at the top. I mean, I think a lot of organizations start cost optimization and they do it as a one-time project. but they don't really build it into their ongoing annual DNA. So they do it once and they think they kind of declare victory. So they sometimes have a little bit of a short view on it and think that since they do it once or there's a one-time focus on this, they're successful. And I think the organizations that we feel are the most successful have ongoing steady governance around this. And that's really an important factor as far as driving the success. So I think that's one point. I think the other point that I would say is, just on the change management side, there's a lot of companies that want to do this, want to be successful, all have the right, motivations to be successful, but they underestimate change management. Again, I'll look at that, starting with the tone at the top, making sure that this is driven from a senior executive perspective and it's a consistent message, a little bit also around communication. So, as you're going through this cost initiative, what is the end game? Make sure that you're communicating on a frequent basis. I think that's very, very important so that the entire organization kind of understands the vision and which way they're driving and how this is an important initiative that's going to be the benefit for the future success of the organization. And then I think sometimes through change, a lot of things that Andrea talked about in some of her excellent answers, there's a component of this that's really, really focusing on, new training. So as things change, make sure that people are trained on the new processes. If you're moving to a shared service, if you're doing different reporting, if you have different cadence around, making requests for spend, all that stuff is going to be a big change in the organization. So I think the right communication and the right training around that change is very, very important. I would think, top of mind, that is probably the thing that is most underestimated around these efforts is, one is people think of it as a short-term project over 2 or 3 months and then they're successful and then they can move on and they don't view it as a long-term change in the way that the company operates. And I also think change management, specifically around communication and training, are sometimes things that are heavily underestimated as companies go through this process.
Yeah, Shawn, I think you hit on all excellent topics. And the only thing I would really add to that is, that tone at the top should really set the overall, alignment of goals, right? To make sure that the entire organization is aligned with what they're trying to achieve. But it is an iterative process. It's not a one-time, cost reduction or cost optimization strategy that happens one time. It's really a culture change, a culture shift. And if you think about some of the topics that we have talked about, right? Re-engineering your processes, realigning the skill sets with, future state automation, it's a culture change. So change management, to Shawn's point, is so critical in this process, and communication throughout, collaboration across the functions is another critical component to ensure success.
My thanks to Andrea and Shawn for this great conversation. They shared a number of things that really stood out to me. These areas of strategic cost optimization represent long-term changes that companies should pursue in the way they operate. Tone at the top is critical. It's also vital to listen to your management and people, and there needs to be alignment of goals. And this is an iterative process, and it's going to take time, and organizations need to commit to that. For more information, I encourage you to visit the Manufacturing and Distribution Industry Group page, as well as the Business Performance Improvement pages on Protiviti.com. And as always, I encourage you to please subscribe to our Powerful Insights podcast series wherever you get your podcast content.